Hi everybody, Bill Polis here, and I want to talk to you today about the soap opera in Washington that's otherwise known as the Fiscal Cliff. And I hope you all listen carefully. I don't care if you're rich, poor, middle class, a man, a woman, a young person, an older person. It doesn't matter. In my opinion, you are being systematically screwed by your government. I don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. You are being screwed over by your government. And the Fiscal Cliff is a carefully orchestrated sideshow to keep you distracted from what's really going on. And I'm going to show you in real simple terms why you are being screwed, why you are in jeopardy. And you need to wake up if you haven't already awakened to what's going on so you can take appropriate action to safeguard yourself and your family. Now, the Fiscal Cliff is, in really rough terms, now this isn't going to be exact, but it's going to be directionally correct, means that if the government does not take other action to the contrary, come January 1st, the Bush tax cuts, the so-called Bush tax cuts, which are now over 8 years old, will expire. And that's going to increase in 2013 the tax rate. And if it doesn't stop the economy, slow it down, and cause a recession, could bring in an additional $100 billion. And in addition, there will be mandatory cuts in spending, somewhere around $600 billion. Now, if that goes into effect, that will definitely throw the economy into recession. And if you already think we're in a recession, you're not alone. It'll just throw us into a deeper recession. So everyone is pretty well agreed on that's not a good thing. So instead of that, you've got the president who, in my opinion, is not leading. You have the House with their proposals. You have the Senate absolutely quiet, doing nothing. And the clock is ticking towards the so-called Fiscal Cliff. Now, let's suppose that the president gets what he wants. He wants to increase the marginal tax rate on the rich. Anyone who makes over $250,000 a year, which is mostly small business owners who provide most of the employment in the country. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but let's say, what do I know? Maybe he's right. So let's increase the taxes on the rich and collect $100 billion. Okay? Now, the president doesn't want to cut the $600 billion. He doesn't want to cut at all. In fact, his proposal right now asks for more spending, not less spending. But let's say the Republicans get what they want. They want to cut spending in 2013 because they know the size of government's out of control and getting worse by the day. So, but they don't want to cut it 600. Let's say they cut it 200. So let's say they're both successful and we end up averting the fiscal cliff and reduce the annual deficit for 2013 by $300 billion. And everyone will declare victory and all is well. Well, all is not well, and here's why you're being screwed. A lot of you already know we have a $16 trillion national debt. And interest rates, most of that debt is shorter term to mid-term. Interest rates on that debt are about 1.5%. You know, the Fed is manipulating rates, keeping them low, ostensibly to stimulate the economy. I think it's because the government can't afford higher rates. At 1.5%, they're paying $240 billion a year just in interest. Now, can you imagine what happens if those rates ever go to 5%, which is more typical in the past 20 years? That they're going to be paying in interest alone $800 billion a year. Did you know that the annual total tax collection from individuals this past year was about $1.1 trillion. Can you imagine if interest rates go to 5% and the interest paid by the government is $800 billion? That's going to practically consume the entire tax revenue from individuals. And this is just getting back to the normal level of interest rates. Now let's look at this a little further. Let's assume that the President and the House and Senate come together with this plan I just outlined, and we are able to reduce the deficit by $300 billion. Well, you may know, I hope you know by now, the annual deficit for the past 4 years has been running $1 trillion a year. And the projection for 2013 is, what do you think it is? It's $1 trillion. So, if they agree to this compromise, instead of the deficit in 2013 being $1 trillion, it'll be $700 billion. So that means, here's our current deficit, that means it's going to go up in 2013 another $700 billion. After all of our great politicians have declared victory. So at the end of 2013, it's going to be 16.7. Now, if the Republicans cave and the Democrats get their way, the spending will not go down at all. It'll actually go up, and so this deficit will be even higher. Okay, but either way, here's our year-end deficit 2013. How about 2014? It'll go up another $1 trillion. Because whatever they come up with here will only apply to this year with some vague projection for future years that they're so good at, and then they never make good on it. So I would say it's a pretty good bet that the deficit is going to go up another $1 trillion. So you got to ask yourself, what does all this mean, these $1 trillion? Because a lot of people can't even relate to that. I don't blame them. It's certainly a bigger number than I'm used to. But the GDP of the United States, which is the gross domestic product, the sum total of all the economic activity in the United States, is in this same area. It's around 16 trillion, maybe a little higher. So the deficit, annual deficit added to the current total debt is now approaching 100% of GDP. And in a couple of years, it's going to go like this: 110%, 120%, 130%. Greece is at around 125%. We're not far behind Greece. Now, the only difference that I can tell between us and Greece is we have a printing press and Greece doesn't. And that's why we're able to forestall the day of reckoning. But people around the world are very, very, very nervous about the U.S. government's situation. And they're getting more nervous about the dollar by the day. That's why they're buying gold and silver. That's why there's so much turmoil in the financial markets day in and day out. So the dollar's position as a reserve currency of the world, days are numbered. Now, that means at some point the markets are going to go into great turmoil. And you don't want to be sitting there wondering what's going on when that happens, because it'll be too late. Now let me just make one other point. Some of you are familiar with the Laffer Curve. This is total taxes collected and this is tax rates. And this is a 0% tax rate, and this is a 100% tax rate. So obviously, if the tax rate was 0, you would not collect any money. As you increase the tax rate, the government collects more and more money. And when you go past a certain point, the government actually collects less money, even though the tax rate goes higher. Now, you never hear about this from the politicians, but this is a well-documented fact in any economy, not just the United States. When rates go to a certain point, the revenues drop. Why? Because high tax rates kill business. How does that happen? Businesses' rate of return drops, so they invest in fewer projects, or they pull their money out of the country altogether. That means there are fewer jobs, less economic expansion, the economy suffers, and it's just a vicious cycle. So when the politicians talk about increasing the rates on the rich, you don't hear them talking about, well, will that actually bring in more money? Or are we at this point already when if we increase the rates to here, we're actually going to collect less money? You see, you'll never hear about that until whenever, a year later, 2 years later, after all the hoopla is over with. So that's why I call it a soap opera in Washington, why it's a sideshow. It's Washington insanity being played out day in and day out. And the media is very complicit in all of this. They just love it because it gets you all excited every day about the latest goings on, about what Obama said, about what Boehner said, about what Reid said. And it's all a sideshow, because even if they come to this agreement here, you can see from what I showed you, we're still left with an ever dramatically increasing deficit, which will kill the dollar, ruin the economy. If the dollar goes down, the economy is going to be ruined, and there's going to be a day of reckoning, I'm sorry to say. Now, that sounds like a fantastic scenario. It'll never happen in America. But these numbers are fantastic, and they've never happened before. So we're in uncharted waters. You have a choice to make. You can just sit here and hope things get better, the so-called put your head in the sand and ignore everything. Or you can decide not to be a victim of these shenanigans and take action. You don't have to participate in this. You don't have to be entranced by the media and the politicians. You can take action and actually benefit from this insanity. And the way I think you do it, because markets become more and more volatile in this situation, that means there are more and more tradable short-term trends than ever before, because the markets are moving so fast. What used to take a year or two for a market to accomplish in going up or going down now can happen in a month. And you've seen it. So, in my view, it's time, if you haven't already done it, it's time to learn how to become a nimble trader of the markets. Paying attention to risk first and foremost. You can't just willy-nilly jump into the markets. You've got to understand the dynamics, risk management, position sizing, and then how to wait for the very best opportunities. And all of that, if you've never traded, sounds very complicated. I'm here to tell you it's not complicated. But you've got to decide to peel away from watching the media for a half hour, an hour a day. Quit doing that. It doesn't do it. Ask yourself, you watch the news for an hour, how does that help you? Doesn't help you. So instead, use that time to learn how to trade. And I don't care how you do it, but go and do it, because if you don't, these people that you think are going to help you are not your friend. They aren't going to help. They're in a box and they have no way out. So it's up to you to take action.